Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to a very wet, miserable, cold autumnal audit meeting. I'm not sure what the July one was like. It's probably just the same, actually, the summer we've had. Starting the agenda for the public meeting. Welcome to everyone, including anyone joining the meeting remotely. For the benefit of any external attendees, to know who we are, can I just start in the left-hand corner if we just introduce ourselves and go around the table.
Sandra Graffam, Head of Comms and Interim Chief Exec for the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
And Fiona Rowe, Director of Local Government and Emergency Services for TIA, Internal Audit.
Kenneth Patrick, Assistant Chief Officer, Constabulary.
Karen Chapman, Member of the Audit Committee. Rachel Member of the Audit Committee.
Hugh May, Audit Committee.
Tim Greenacre, Member of the Audit Committee.
Lindsay Hoy, Member of the Audit Committee.
Colette Batson, CFO to the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner.
Amanda Houchin, Admin Assistant to the OPCC.
Kate Boswell, Executive Assistant to the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Excellent. Starting then with declarations of interests. I note you've got one changes to note. Do you want to cover those, and if there are any others around the table?
Yeah, happy to do that. So to update my retirement from the University of Suffolk on the 31st of July, and also from one of their spin-out joint venture companies.
Thank you. Any other changes to be noted? No? If not, thank you. The minutes of the Audit Committee held on the 5th of July and matters arising. You can circulate it with the papers. I will turn the pages. If there are any comments or questions, we'll deal with them page by page, and then we'll come to the actions on the final 2 pages, please. Anything on one is fairly straightforward. Page 2, page 3 are the points arising. I think 4:15. Fiona, has everybody got access to the TIA portal now?
I believe so. I'm not 100% sure, Lindsay, whether did they not come back to you. Right, okay, so I will chase that up again. I received confirmation that you'd been given access, so I did see your email and emailed again, but which is in that case not quite everybody, and I'll get that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I didn't have access, but my password is timed out, I presume. Yeah. I'm waiting for a password reset.
Oh, thank you. Can we leave the 2 of you to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Pages 4 and 5. Pages 6 and 7. For 2, Fiona, the Head of Internal Audit opinion presumably will be coming forward at the next meeting.
Yes.
Pages 8 and 9. Pages 10 and 11. Finally, page 12. So if there are no comments or questions on it, are you happy that these are shown? Summary of actions. Have we got E&Y on the phone?
No, they've given their apologies for this meeting, but with regards to their actions, they did update the annual auditors report following the last sort of meeting, and that's going to be published on the website. So I think that covers 3.3, 3.6, 3.8. With regards to 3.19, external audit to follow up on the impact of collaborative work with areas such as Seven Forces and ERSU. I did ask, and they said they will cover that as part of the 23-24 value for money report.
That's correct. So with the summary of actions, Kenneth, there are 3 for you in the list. Do you want to take all 3 in succession?
Yeah. First one was just a really good update in terms of the protocols we've worked out with TIA to ensure that sort of less delays on the constabulary side in the reports from draft to final. I think that's working a little bit better through this time around. But I suggest you keep that one open. Sort of tested it in anger, I don't think yet. But let's say it looks good as a work in progress. Let's see how we do over the next 2 or 3 months on the through, but keep it simple. Second. I think the recommendation tracker that was circulated. I completed it and sent it across.
I think it was circulated.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you sent it almost straight after the meeting, and
Okay. Hopefully that's been done. Yeah, I'll take those and think they'll be presented when we present the final accounts for signing. Might not be until February, I think.
Thank you. Colette, do you want to take the various actions attributed to you?
Yeah, I think they're 5.2 to 5.9, but I think they all relate to the annual governance statement as well. And so, like Kenneth, I will include those in the revised, in the final draft of the annual governance statement, which becomes the February next year, alongside the accounts.
Fiona, 4.3 through to 416, 426.
Yeah, so in relation to the article disposals tracker, we do need to still review the responses to those breaches being completed. We were going to be completing that as part of the follow-up process. So that will come hopefully to the next meeting, but that still needs to be done as part of the follow-up. For 4.18, links to the, that's the NPCC. So 4.20, audit dates to add to the schedule to produce a more defined audit plan for the September meeting. Those dates have been added into the SICA. 4.23, to confirm the process for dealing with overdue audit recommendations. As Kenneth had mentioned, we have reviewed the process. The protocol and flow chart that goes with that has been revised and is with the PMO office of the PMO to clarify that they're happy with it as well. And then that will be issued, but we are working to the new protocols already. You'll see from the SICA report for the level of follow-up and where we are now with it, that process is now starting to be more effective. And in relation to closeout of audits, we're now having, so when we had a debrief before the draft report was issued, we're also now having an exit meeting after the draft report was issued to try and tie up the recommendations and management responses, so that rather than waiting for several responses to come in and that taking a number of weeks, that process is in place as well. In terms of 4.26, the recommendation status report to be in date order, I'm aware that does still need to be changed because there's about 4 recommendations that are overdue and they're not in date order. They are still in the order of the audits of where they came out. So that does still need to be changed.
Who's taking, thank you for that, who's taking 418?
And yeah, I think it's the APP papers for the. And Kate and I had a discussion, sorry, about the 6.2 and the 6.3 updating the review committee activities reports that have been updated, but we don't publish that anywhere other than committee agenda papers. Would you like that be publishing, or we send it out to committee members? And the report itself is still the original report in the committee agendas pack online, because that's the original documentation which went to the audit committee. We wouldn't usually reissue it, but would you like it circulated to the members to see if the changes have been included?
I think that would be helpful, just to
Yeah.
close the point topics. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Point 6, can I suggest we carry forward as an action discussing before today's meeting? People proposing an afternoon session, certainly a post-meeting session for December, to look at the terms of reference for this committee. I picked up all the actions. Oh, sorry, 6.2 and 6.3, the business admin.
That was the review of the business activities
Sorry,
report, which
yeah.
will recirculate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's sorry, yes, yeah, bringing it here. Thank
that's
you.
okay.
Right. Excellent. Right. Yeah.
Did we do 4.3, 4.14 and 4.12?
So,
4.3.
Liz, thank you. No, we didn't. Fiona, the points in the middle of the action 4.3, 4.12.
The revised internal audit plan. Yeah,
We have at this meeting.
yeah, that one's at this meeting. Sorry, what was the next one?
4.12 and 4.14.
Sorry, apologies. It's because we'd started later on those. 4.12, in terms of the grievous reporting for the number of cases to be dealt with, I'm going to reissue that as a report. I'm just waiting for some of that data. And 4.14, same with ill health retirement. I've requested that data. I'm just waiting for that to come through.
And you happy as covered?
Yes, thank you.
On to item 3 on the agenda, the summary internal control. Fiona, taking this one.
Absolutely, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the progress report, as you can see, we have issued a number of reports since the last meeting. So we've had a really good push on getting the final reports out. As you can see there, there's one limited assurance report, which is the procurement strategy and compliance, and the other audits are all reasonable assurance and substantial assurance. I'll go through each of those in turn. The procurement strategy and compliance, with that being limited assurance, the main issue around there was around documentation, and some of this was a bit more related with the Seven Forces. So where documentation is then going back to Seven Forces to be held centrally on systems, we found that some of that information wasn't there. How we're looking for them to address this is because there was a bit of a gap between what's managed locally and then what's managed within the Seven Forces, is for when things to go over there, for them to then start doing spot checks to make sure all documentation is loaded up onto the system. And it's just where some of the responsibilities sit between management. The remainder of the procurement audit, because we generally look at local compliance with the Seven Force agreements, but also in terms of how things are managed locally below the higher levels. But it was really main one around documentation. We brought it into limited assurance. So perhaps if there's any questions.
questions for Fiona? Please.
Do you want
No,
to
go with the.
say thank you for the report? The first question is similar to what I asked in the last committee, which is I don't get a sense of the size and scale of procurement. So, as an example, you've looked at 7 contracts. I don't know what 7 is, 7 of what, and what is the value of these. So I don't get a sense of the size of what the coverage is and the size of the area as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if I think this is a wider question around background and scope of what goes into the reports. So I appreciate we spoke earlier that I don't have access to it anymore to the TIA website, but this should stand alone anyway as a public document.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Taken on board with what you said before for the new audits coming out, that's been incorporated into the audits. And I think with some of these legacy ones, we are going to have this with each of them. I'm quite happy then for each of these ones, especially what we see today, is to go back to the auditors to get that information and then perhaps do a summary sheet so that I can circulate that outside of the meeting. So you've got that for each of them.
Thank you. And then my second question on this, particularly on recommendation 5, which is the priority 1 recommendation. It's not clear what the actual root cause is. So you've explained what some of the problems are that have come out from it, some of the symptoms, but not the root cause. And when I look at the management comments, they mention that a checklist, and it may just be in the wording, it says a checklist already exists. So from the recommendation you've given, I'm not sure if that document already existed and it wasn't tested. What the root cause is as to why some of these things aren't filled in the first place, whether or not there's a later control that hasn't operated. So it leaves me with a few questions really as to whether or not what management comment are going to do is going to fix it. And will it fix the root cause as to why this is happening in the first place?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll take that point on board because I think with a number of them, where the management comments do come back, it's where, we need to be more explicit in the root cause and documenting that so that if the document's not there or can't be identified and hasn't been completed, just to make sure that actually let us tie that together.
Yeah, thank you. So in findings, I'm very keen to understand what is the control break and what's the root cause, not just what are the issues that have been found.
Yeah. And I think some of that is just because where it is exception reporting, I think it has then gone perhaps that too far in the exceptions and really needs to be reported back to show that root cause as well, just highlighting the action to be taken.
Thank you.
My point's not unrelated to Lynn's point, but it is about also tracking back to the strategic risk. And I think that from the way the risk is worded here, and I appreciate again, we're not looking at the risk register in this committee, but the findings, I absolutely agree around the context because some of these, the 7 contracts, I had the same questions at 7 out of 10 or 7 out of 700 because, there's a huge difference then if you've got rates and the value as well, because something like a modern slavery policy, if it's for a small SME contract of less than 20,000, that's very different to a very large something else. But going back to the risk, a lot of the findings are very detailed around the process of procurement. Does the contract have a start date? Does it have an end date? And I'm absolutely not dismissing the fact that that has to be robust because there's no point in having a procedure that's not going to be followed. But I didn't get a sense of whether or not the risk, as a result of the way the Seven Forces is operating and through the procurement strategy, have there been missed opportunities for collaboration? Have there been economies of scale that haven't been maximised because the processes haven't actually alerted the different police forces to these opportunities? And it was tying back some of the findings to that bigger, much more strategic risk that, particularly in these times of financial constraint, we want to make sure that those opportunities are being maximised. So I think it is that big of a context piece, but it's also saying if, you know, that risk is not just that the processes aren't followed and the procedures are not being taken forward, but it's the fact that as a result of that fall down in the systems, the police force has spent more money than it should have done, or it's not secured the best value for money contract that it potentially could have done had that engagement been there.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of, I think addressing some of that, absolutely, we can incorporate some of that because I think some of it is easily achievable in the sense that it's with how the processes are and what we're finding. It can be then linked back to those bigger risks because of how they're not managing those procurements perhaps as most effectively as they could. I think in terms of achieving value for money in the actual procurements, we need to make sure that we incorporate that within the scope of the audit because you could then, that would change slightly what the scope is rather than looking at actually, are you complying with policy and procedure for those procurements? You're actually looking at how can they achieve value for money, and it's a slightly different angle, which is easily achieved, but we just need to make it very clear in the scope of what we're doing, that would be the focus of the audit and what we'd be incorporating.
And I think just that constant, you know, tying it back to the risk and looking at that. So yes, if at the outset of scoping it, it's that work that's done with the internal staff to say how would we best evaluate that. So yeah.
To ask a slightly left field question, picking up from Aaron's, to what degree do we need to lean on the audit reviews that are undertaken on 7 floors to supplement the work that we're doing in relation to Suffolk?
Absolutely. They do take a different focus. Obviously, it's a different provider that undertakes those audits on behalf of all of the 7 forces. And we have, in the past, looked at what because I think it's been a while since they did the review of the 7 forces, but we would look at it as in making sure that Norfolk and Suffolk are compliant with the 7 force model and also within the local procurement rules. But absolutely, it's something that would need to be taken into consideration. They haven't done an overview review of the 7 forces in that context for a while. And even when we did something very similar, we did a procurement audit in the same year as them, when we came out with very different findings because they were looking at it from different angles, because they are looking at it just from a purely 7 force perspective rather than a local perspective with how there is compliance. The Norfolk and Suffolk did bring back across the head of procurement role to make sure that the local procurement is as it should be. That was running really, really well, and chap did then retire, and somebody else is come to step in, I think, and you might probably have a bit more on that.
Yeah, it starts 1st of November. But these, yeah, so we're responsible in-house for any purchases up to 60k. Make sure it goes through a compliant procurement process. Anything over 60 gets pushed out to some customer services to deal with alongside the procurement manager.
Thank you.
We have noticed a difference in compliance locally with having that in-house resource. It has vastly improved since.
Thank you. Well, I'll try not to retrace. All my colleagues have really covered the issue, obviously. 2 questions and just an observation, really. I'll do them all at once and people can answer them. I'm just going back to the sample size. Was there a discussion between management and the auditors over whether 7 contracts? Why 7 contracts was adequate? Say what a second. In terms of management actions, I mean, you might take a view, even though this is a fantastic report, that management's responded to tick the boxes, particularly in the case of the urgent and the important recommendations. But when you look at them, you do wonder whether actually has anything changed. You know, so staff will do this in future. It's an easy thing to say, or an easy instruction for them to give. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll do it. So I was probably looking a bit more, even this meeting, for some assurance probably from management or issues that perhaps Karen highlighted have been addressed. And if this was to be revisited again, it wouldn't look as bad for these. I mean, I'm just hoping that the recommendations were dealt with the scheme of the whole of the procurement system and all the contracts rather than the 7 in question, because again, the sample size may be too small for that to be really much value. The third point was just stating the obvious, I'm afraid, which is really about this is fundamental to the value for money role that this committee has. That's something that the committee will have to bear in mind when we get to the end of the reports, I think, in terms of the assurances that it can take from the work that's already taken place.
And Fiona, I want to respond to.
I don't know if you want to go first, Fiona.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in terms of, I suppose,
Sample size, yeah. Was there a discussion?
there was a discussion around sample size. In fact, a sample of 7, because they're very large contracts to look at within the time within that audit, was very constrained. So normally you would look probably around usually about 5 or 6. But it was pushed out to 7 just because.
So why was taking point? These are the larger contracts, so hopefully more value, more lessons to be learned from them.
Yeah.
So 7 out of. Just have a sense of scale. Are we talking hundreds or?
I would need to come back to you on the sense of scale, and that is one of the things I'll take forward now. I'll take that as an action.
But was management satisfied with this? That this was a reasonable sample size?
Absolutely, it was discussed with management at the scoping meeting. It was agreed how many contracts would be looked at, and what we agreed then what contracts they were going to be, and what they needed to. So everything was agreed.
Tim, we do have the senior commercial business partner joining us this week, so asking to remain compliant moving forward. Any point around directed with 7 contract ones that you didn't sample them like also be undocumented what within that.
Quick one for me. I was going to make a similar point about the context and values and things. I mean, obviously the risk we're facing on here is around value for money and economies of scale. I don't get a sense necessarily of whether there was a risk of any compliance with any legislation as a result of it, given the values of the contracts without knowing the values and what triggers that might hit in terms of legislation. I'm not really sure, but again, that's why it would be useful to have. But I noticed as well that the sample was entered into from 2020 onwards. Has there been did you notice any improvement in more recent procurements at all, or was the issues consistent throughout?
The issues were consistent throughout, so it's not something that had dipped and improved again in terms of compliance with the 7 force side. We had noticed just with procurement improvement locally, that's not within the 7 force elements.
Anything further? Take us through agile working.
Absolutely, thank you, Chair. So moving on to agile working. See there, we gave the audit of reasonable assurance with one important recommendation that was raised, and the recommendation was is something that whilst it came out of the agile working, it is something that affects both agile working and non-agile working, so where people are in set patterns of working, and it was just around the assault incident forms and completion of those. And it was just really to highlight that came, whilst it came out of this review, because it was identified during testing, it is something that's actually applied to both.
I feel a little bit nitpicky. I'm going to ask it. There's the wording in here around doing assault incident forms promptly. What is promptly? Is this within a day, a week? Didn't get a sense from that as to how far out of policy these actually were.
Absolutely. I think sort of as it was stated in finding, there were ones that had come sort of up to 10 months to review the form. I think we've really gone for promptly for management to identify, I suppose, what promptly would mean. So we don't want to be stating it's got to be done within 3 days, and actually that's never going to be feasible to do. But I do agree we need to define what promptly would be within their context to make sure that they are done in a reasonable timescale.
Okay, and again, size and impact. So you say there's cases where line management, but I don't know how many. I don't know how many we looked at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think again for this one, I've noted it as the action for all of them. So for all of the reports that are in this pack today, I will send around a separate form outside of the meeting to show context for each of them. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just make a plea on the management comments? Take pity on us with acronyms. Sometimes I've worked some of them out, but just that was inspiring. I know it's very shorthand, but once in a while they creep in.
You don't need any particular ones.
I was going to ask, DCC, I had as Deputy Chief Constable day, but is that really
That's
a
absolutely.
day? Okay,
Um,
and it's a
well, it's a series of meetings.
and JCAT, I had Joint Committee on Operational Training.
No.
No.
Joint Forces.
There you go. Okay. Yeah. We'll get there. That's for a few more months.
Just on that point, would it be helpful if somebody could pull together a glossary with acronyms?
There is one. It's this, so I'll find it and email.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you.
Because I have to use it quite frequently.
Anything further on regarding it? If not, resource.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yeah, moving on to the resource management. Again, we gave a reasonable assurance for this with 2 recommendations. The main recommendation there was around routinely checking of officers on restricted duties. We did find, and I get your point again, I know you're going to ask about context for sample, which again I'll send around. But really, sort of, there was one. There was a sick note on file for an officer, but they were still being rotated onto duties. So it was just around the processes for making sure that the information that they're using is accurate to make sure that they're making decisions on mastering. So if that's any questions.
Thank you. Looking at the operational effectiveness matter that's reported, when I read it, it feels like there's a wider issue around staff being able to take time off in lieu or annual leave. The fact that such a large pot was built up in the first place. So is there a wider issue around staff welfare being able to take their leave in an appropriate timescale?
There are issues where leave gets cancelled, rest days get cancelled. The riots recently over the summer was a good kind of case in point. It's down to line managers to ensure that officers, staff who do have been cancelled do build up a significant amount of toil, can take that time back. I think the issue for us is that we don't believe that those annual leave balances are accurate. That are sitting on the DMS system. So we're working through that. The payment allowances meeting is looking at back to see, well, actually, is this accurate? Does this lead to a financial liability? We don't think so. But actually, there's a wider point in terms of how's it been managed down and how's it been able to be built up on the system without being addressed. So I'm sort of circling around the question. I think there is a general issue around we're overworked, but that's life, unfortunately. And when you get deployed, you get deployed. I was just saying to Karen, meeting to sort of reset after all the events over the summer. It takes about 3 to 6 months to get that work through. People have had to sort of cancel their leave or build up a series of rest days that they've been entitled to but weren't able to take. It'll take time to sort of earn that time back. So that's how we're managing it. But yeah, we are aware of the welfare impact and we are putting the appropriate welfare apps in place. But sometimes, you know, you just have to go where the demand is. Can't say no on occasions, but it's a good point to raise. And I think the OEM issue is a good point to raise it under rather than this as well.
What needs to happen, sorry, it's a follow-up question. What needs to happen to assure yourself that the balances are accurate and to continue monitoring moving forward in order to highlight any large areas or individuals or teams that are not able to take their leave routinely?
It gets cascaded down through chief officer level. Now, this will be sitting in the ACC operations portfolio largely. They were the officers most affected, and then the ACC joint portfolio as well. So it is on them as chief officers to ensure that that cascades down and the welfare wraps are in place. And I know that they are doing that, and that's why it's a 3 to 6 month reset. Because we just can't say take your leave now. Officers deploy on a day-to-day basis. So that's how we take insurance. That's how we take our assurance. That's how the chief takes their assurance around all of this. In terms of those figures on the system, we are doing some sort of sample checking on that and working it through to say, well, actually, what is behind this? Is it something that we need to be across, or is it nothing? And so far, the results of this sample testing is the latter rather than the former. So there's a system issue there. We need to try and get to the bottom of, but that's taking a little bit more time.
Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, succession plan.
Thank you, Chair. So with succession planning, while we've raised reason assurance with 4 reporting recommendations, all of them around the same theme, where succession planning, there's a big risk around succession planning where you've got sort of the workforce and highly skilled roles that are vulnerable to sort of a slightly ageing workforce and into key succession planning into key roles as well. So really the recommendations are around how to address those gaps or weaknesses.
Yeah, very minor point or recommendation for the second target date, I think should be 2025, not January 24.
Can I just go back to the link between, and again, maybe it's at the scoping stage, but just the link between the work that was done and the strategic risk that's been identified, because the findings are very much around succession planning. And for me, that's very much about somebody's career progression. But the risk that's been identified is retention in the round. And I think that there are differences between the two. So it could be that there isn't a risk on the risk register around particularly succession planning, but some of the findings around those key roles, those very highly skilled roles, that to me is quite a different risk of having somebody to fill that post rather than just a general retention figure that the police force could be looking to deliver on. So I think, again, going forward, as we're looking at the new audits coming in, it's around just asking that challenging question around, has the right risk been identified to which the audit work's focusing on? Is the audit work going to actually provide findings that will help management identify whether or not that risk is being well mitigated? And if not, how not? And again, I know this ties back to the fact of that bigger risk register discussion that we'll come on to, but I just think this one again struck me that there was just a slight mismatch between that strategic risk and what the work had actually looked at. So it's at that scoping stage that management and internal audit are very comfortable that the work will address that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do take on your point with how it's, especially how it's phrased there with the risk and how that links back to it. So even where there are those links back to it and how they got there,
Yeah.
Perhaps we do need to be that clearer to show that link and that thread along, just to make sure that it is clear. With, like you said, the risk is retention, but with succession planning, yeah, it's a slightly different issue.
Yeah, and they're linked, because if you don't think there's a clear future for you, I absolutely get that people may think that I'll go elsewhere.
Yeah.
But particularly around the kind of the key skills that, you know, that's not just a retention issue, that's about training, that's about identifying the right person.
Yeah. I think, like you say, it's about us being clearer to make sure that we've got that link that's very explicit. Take that on board for the audits.
Thank you. I was sort of looking at these 3 audits kind of as a one really, and this is around people management steps. And obviously it's raised, this is a snapshot on these particular topics, but it does seem to me that there's some issues here with our broader people management approach, which led me a little bit to worry about on this particular report. We've got 4 important recommendations, all of which are going to be done in the next two months or so. And I just started to worry about whether there's something more fundamental that needs to be addressed here, and how these matters are being addressed in the context of some broader issues. So, for example, workforce planning, if we take recommendation 3. That's a very significant amount of work. I think it acknowledges the amount of complexity and detail and consultation that we face with that. Just wonder whether there's a danger that these different matters, all of which are raising different flags for us today through these reports, are actually being looked at in a broader people management sense by management, and putting these in some sort of order so that they're all deliverable on the dates they're committed to. Otherwise, these are just isolated dates relating to workforce planning, for example. I just wondered that we've got a number of different things raising some flags for us today. Is the whole thing being looked at by a group, by the head of HR or whatever?
Can give you the short that it is. It's relatively new in terms of the work we're doing. That one event in terms of investigation, in terms of actually what skills we need now, what skills we need in the future, and where do we want to sit in terms of a kind of a maturity curve on strategic workforce planning. So we do have colleagues across the people directorate working on this, and it gets reported to chief officers and chief officers Suffolk. So they are across it. Where's it all link into in terms of succession planning, and there are bits there that we're working on at the moment as well in terms of the coherence through the people strategy through the director of people. But we're starting at quite a low base on some of this work and then moving forward. We'd love to go faster, but we don't have the money that we could invest in this. A lot of our time, colleague time in the people directorate is maintaining our police officer numbers at a particular level, referred to as maintenance headcount level, which is 1425. If we fall below that number, we're penalised £40,000 per officer. We fall below at the end of September, and 40,000 per year. So we fall below at the end of March. So that is where our focus is. Because that's where the funding is, and we can't afford to lose 5, 10. Be below wouldn't be a huge amount in terms of 1425, but it's a huge amount in terms of lost funding. So that's where the resources are going at the moment. We're fighting that fire. We would like to get into those value-added areas that you articulated, Tim, and we are, but maybe not as quickly as we would like to get into, because there are other issues that directorate, the results of national initiatives through the results of Cousins and Carrick, so that's put quite a bit of strain on colleagues in the directorate. But I say I'm not trying to dance around the points you've made. Try to say we are, but there's a wider context of other areas that you sort of focus in on. But it's good points and good recommendations made, and we're working on it.
That's a really helpful assurance. Thank you. And just to clarify, I wasn't saying need to do this. I've typically some of this taps into areas that we've had experience of doing in the past, and it's take a heck of a long time to do these things. I'm just worried about life and the various other constraining factors that you've got going on actually mean are these reasonable? And do you need a bit longer to do this time? Take a point that you've set these dates in that context. That's what we do.
The other uncertainty is the government with 13,000 extra police officers. We don't know what that means, but we're kind of sort of thinking, right, okay, we need to put a bit back through the proving ground, and we might be switching some resources that might sort of back into that. So we're watching that with interest.
Financial system.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So key financial systems, really pleased to give that substantial assurance and a clean bill of health with no recommendations. This is an audit that we review every year. And I think last year there was one minor recommendation that was implemented. And what we do find here is whenever there is a recommendation raised and implemented, it stays implemented, which is always very pleasing. So to have no recommendations this year isn't unheard of, because of controls in place and actions that are taken. So it was something that I was expecting. We struggle to find anything now because it is very well managed. And then onto the new e-recruitment system. So this was a specific audit around the implementation of the new system from an IT perspective. And we've just made one operational effectiveness matter around that, which I'm aware hasn't been incorporated into this report. I will get that circulated outside of the meeting. But there isn't anything in particular that was raised of concern about the system.
Questions on this or residual questions on previous reports presented?
And then key financial systems. Again, going back to the scope, I wasn't really sure which key financial systems were looked at and what the scope of the audit was. And when I went back to the original audit plan for this, it doesn't give any further information on there either about what the actual fundamental elements of scope were.
Yeah.
What was actually looked at?
What I can do rather than go and sort of just remembering on everything that was there, And if I circulate the audit plan memorandum for the audit outside of the meeting, it's okay. And that will detail everything that was covered. Within the scope.
Thank you.
On the key strategic findings, the third one down, access to the accounts receivable, talks about that management have accepted the risk and thus no formal recommendation has been raised. Had that been accepted previously?
From memory on there, yes. There are, due to the nature of the ERP system, whether it's a templated system, we have in previous years made recommendations that will raise recommendations and highlighted the weakness in the system. It's then accepted by management because it's a templated system. There isn't anything that they could do within the system to implement a control there. As such, then in future years we'll highlight that that's an accepted risk by management. But if I circulate the full report, then you'll be able to see the details of that as well, if that's okay. Thank you.
And to ask on the new recruitment system. So was the audit limited to looking at how the system is being implemented rather than controls within the system? So it seems like it's very much about how it's being set up, how it's being rolled out, how we've done the user acceptance testing.
Yeah.
Is it that rather than a walkthrough, we're happy the right controls are there to make sure the recruitment is compliant with?
I will double check, but I believe it was just the implementation of the system, but I will double check and then clarify.
Yeah, no, Appendix B, bearing in mind that the item is the finalised 24-25 internal audit plan, trying to avoid discussion of content 24-25 until we come to the next agenda item. Is there anything that you want to highlight in Appendix B? I know we have got the dates in, which is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. There was two things that I wanted to highlight. Within the 23-24, there are two final reports that have been issued since the last meeting for data quality and staff appraisals that will come to the next audit committee as final. And we have got the vetting and commissioning grants. I'm aware they've been outstanding for a while. We have had meetings with the key staff, and we'll have the final reports of those to the next meeting as well, and that will close off the previous year. And then in terms with 24-25, under there where you've got the items in yellow, which is the work in progress, I'm pleased to say that whilst obviously they've still got it as work in progress, that's all near completion with more or less all of those, the debrief meetings either having happened over the last couple of weeks or are happening next week. So we'll be able to get those draft reports out and you'll be able to see a lot more further progress on those as well. And as you've said, with the remaining audits, and since this report has been issued, those remaining dates or start dates have been agreed as well with management. So further progress has been held on those. In terms of resources for all of those audits, resources have been assigned to all of the audits for the rest of the year. We've got, I know when we come onto the plan with the audits paused, we're going to be meeting with management late October to agree, are we far enough forward to be able to introduce those audits, and management obviously have the capacity for us to undertake those audits. But in the meantime, the remaining audits have been scheduled in and are either already in progress or about to start or going into Q4. Resources being assigned, so we do have the capacity to undertake the work.
Questions? The one audit, not straying into the next agenda item, data protection, freedom of information. It's the only audit listed here in Appendix B that doesn't feature in the 24-25 plan. What's the position with that specific audit?
Yeah, so that was one that was brought forward from 22-23. It was paused due to a data breach. Previously, the investigations into that data breach have all been at a stage now we can actually continue with the audit. And I do believe this week a start date has been agreed for that work to be continued and sort through to fruition.
And finally, the last two lines on page 24, brought forward days, increased to 24-25 days. I believe the 275 is the contractual effort.
Yes.
If the report is implied that there are resources for 405 working days.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I just put them on to separate lines just to show what was brought forward and what was the in-year days.
And how does that 405 compare to what was worked in the previous year?
So in the previous year, because there was brought forward days, because we've had a sort of knock-on effect each year. So last year there was 370 days, but then we have got 130 of those days carried forward. So it is a considerable increase. With a number of those days, yeah, it is a considerable increase. So that does have an impact both on management time and on the auditors. We've had, from an audit point of view, additional resources vetted onto the contract in recent months to address from that side. On management side, obviously we do have to be mindful of the impact on management. The audits are spread across different areas, so they're not within the same management teams. And having discussions with each of them in terms of scheduling those audits. So far, management have been accommodating in terms of when they can accommodate that work. Some of the, I suppose, impact on management. So like with the the fleet management strategy, where the strategy wasn't quite ready for us to go and look at last year, and it's also then got fleet maintenance. They fall within the same area. It has been discussed with the fleet manager to whether that can be accommodated, and being confirmed that it can. We are having those level of discussions with, I suppose, individual managers at that level who would be dealing. But we are wary of the impact that it's having on my time.
And again, honestly, not talking about 24-25 here, but a general question in terms of the management board. Under the new operating model, reports are routed through PMO. So it's not just a question of the individual business area to respond to the audit reports meaningfully and promptly, but it's also whether PMO have got bandwidth to make sure that they can route in both directions incoming and outgoing.
Yeah,
the system that is clearly starting to work is not now impeded by an increase in the reports and the work effort.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're very mindful of that as well. With the change to arrangements for having the exit meeting as well as the debrief meeting, I'm actually hoping that it takes some of the pressure off them in terms of trying to coordinate, say, 7 responses from Norfolk, from Suffolk, from the individual managers and the directors overseeing that. So you've normally got sort of both ACOs, both CFOs, and you've got the individual managers and PMO all feeding into each of those reports, where we're trying to get a number of those people into that meeting. That will stop some of the excess time at the moment that they had been spending on going back and forth chasing different responses and moving their time across. So it would still be impacting on their time, but I think where we're gaining savings in other areas within the process, hopefully that means they can then accommodate the time for the reports.
Just following on from that question, the scheduling then to start with audits and also then for them close down meetings, is that being scheduled with the PMO office at the same time?
Yes, so everything's being scheduled with the PMO office and they are scheduling the meetings with us so that they're involved in either attending those meetings or at least being aware of those meetings should they wish to attend, and then coordinating anything outside of that. Currently, we have on average fortnightly meetings with PMO to make sure that even if it's a half an hour meeting, to discuss where the status of everything is, where it needs to be, and what involvement would be, so that having the regular communication, say having a half hour meeting rather than having to do a monthly meeting and then lots of work outside the meetings, we can get a lot of that coordinated.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned, fully resourced with vetted staff who can work on this client. Can I also ask, is there adequate skills mix within there as well? So within each of the audits across all of them, which are on the plan opened up here, there's a whole host of different things between culture, projects, IT, lots of different, quite specific skills as well. So do the teams hold all of those skills?
Yes, they do. In terms of the individuals that we've had vetted on, we have had one more junior staff vetted on, but in terms of the other vetted on, two of them are of a senior level that have the required skills that we need to undertake the majority of those audits. And so the three main people who are vetted on contract have held senior positions, either within TIA as a director of audit previously, or in senior positions in other organisations such as head of governance, head of risk, head of commissioning. So they've all had enough seniority and exposure to the subject areas so that we have got the right level of skills. So we're not just putting in staff that don't have the right skill mix, as well as the ones who have already been vetted as well to bring in resilience on the contract. And I've started to do this in other forces where I now look after this nationally, is having each of the individuals working on each force vetted across the other forces. So if we do need to bring resilience in again, rather than bringing in just local people, actually bringing in people who are regularly working just on police clients, so they do have the skill set to actually come across and fill that gap easily without too much training or input from management. Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we have done a lot of work over the summer on follow-up. As you can see, there's 17 recommendations that have either been implemented or no longer relevant. The majority of them are implemented rather than not being relevant. There's 4 recommendations that are not yet due. And then there are 4 overdue recommendations, and we've added another column in there for newly added and that have become due because they came due just as papers, or around the time the papers were being produced. And we are doing follow-up again at the moment around those. So it has reduced the overdue recommendations quite considerably. And now we are in a position with those and to clear those other ones. And with PMO, that's another part of what PMO is in heavily involved in as well. So going forward, we would hope to see that those figures remain low and drop down. Perhaps if there's any questions around those. Oh, sorry, there's one overdue recommendation. And the business interest, secondary employment and declaration of interest. Just to really state on this one, it has been substantially complete. We're not going to be closing the recommendation down until it is fully complete and if but there's been considerable amount of work has happened.
Can I just ask, and this is a question more from management, on page 26, the recommendations around the staff policy, there just seems to be a mismatch in first recommendation on the table. It says policy's been subject to substantial rewrite and the new policy's been there through consultation published. And then the second recommendation, it says the decision has been taken not to have a policy. And there just seemed to be a mismatch there.
Oh, sorry. Perhaps if I could answer that one. Yeah, that's okay. One is around police staff and the other one is around police officers. And that was where the difference was.
Thank you. Okay. That's, yeah, this is officers. Excellent. Thank you.
Just say, Chair, I mean, we take it face value, obviously. Some good progress. Good.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. So agree, it's been really good progress since the last committee here. Can I ask you, Fiona, just to talk through when a recommendation is deemed as closed, what does TIA do as part of the contract in order to ensure that these recommendations are closed? And how far does that check go into the resilience and sustainability of any new controls or improvements that have been made? And I think this links back a bit to the conversation that we had earlier over some of the previous findings in the reports earlier on around how do these actually get implemented.
No, absolutely. So in terms of, obviously we get statements from management to say they have been implemented, and then we do a check on the sample of recommendations to verify that is actually the case. Like with the one that was substantially implemented, you can see that they've done quite a lot of work on it, but they haven't quite done enough to actually address the issue. We wouldn't go to huge degrees to go and verify actually what does this look like now to retest the system, just due to the volume of days that we have and time we have available to do that. What we would do though is when the audit comes around again, if we've got a recommendation that was implemented and then it's quite evident through their detailed testing that it hasn't been implemented, we would flag that.
Have we looked at all at any system of self-assurance where recommendations are implemented at the management, relevant business area management reviews the effectiveness of the recommendations and to ensure that they are fully embedded functioning as they were intended to?
We, as part of the follow-up, and going to them to say, you know, what's happened to this, what have you done, what actions have you taken, that would then give that health assurance in terms of back to us, this is what they're saying that it should have been, that they're expected to have done and what they have done. I think some of them it's very evident, if there's a policy that's been produced, it's very clear. And then there's others where, you know, that we'll talk through with them actually what they've done, where it's very easily evidenced, then we'd get the evidence for that. Where it's not as easily evidenced because it's something that they then need to embed within a process, then as I say, we will take sample checks within those, but then we will take management assurance on that and then recheck it in a detailed level to see that it's actually embedded and stayed embedded as part of the next audit. And it's usually just down to obviously volume of time that we have to do follow-up work within that. But yeah, where we can, where it's easily verifiable, we will do that.
Or indeed on the report of appendix. Is there anything that we need to know nitrous oxide gas and you are parents, they don't feel hugely relevant. Are they on the portal?
Yes, these are all the ones on the portal at the moment. Over the summer, admittedly, the number of them that go on the portal generally dries up while people are on leave, and as you come back into September, you start to see more of them come back on the portal. I think the ones you're going to sort of see sort of coming up over the next few weeks is more really around things like the global audit, internal audit standards, and procurement. Rules are changing. Some of those, well, they've come out previously. There's been updates to them, and they'll be coming out again. So we start to see some of those filter out now. People are back into after the summer, back into work mode.
Literally a case of watch the space.
Absolutely.
Anything further on the Sunday term files report? If not, on to the final internal audit plan for year, bearing in mind that we're looking at this almost exactly 6 months into the annual cycle. And effectively, therefore, we're looking at a plan that covers the next half year down to 31st of March 2025. Having talked to some degree about the methodology and the numbers, Fiona, do you want to talk us through content of the report, content of the plan? I think it would be helpful just to remind us as to the selection process for the audits included.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. So I'm aware the sort of draft plans have come along previously, and one of the requests was to have the risk register references added into the plans. I did sit with the risk manager going through the high level risks and which ones that they were most relevant to make sure that it went from both sides, because what we're going to be doing out of this as well, whilst we do provide them with the internal audit reports, is actually for them to link it back as well into the risk registers to show where they're getting assurance from, so that it's actually linking both ways. And as well, from the draft plan that came previously, one of the requests was to show when the period of the last audit was and the previous assurance around that. Obviously, since this was actually then produced, we have then issued a few more audits with outcomes of assurance over the last year. So those have been included there as well. What I've also done is included within the strategic rolling plan, you'll see some audits that don't have a tick of when they're going to be covered. And this is really just to show, so for example, use of social media as undertaken in 22-23 with a reasonable assurance. We're not proposing to look at it again, but we've included it here for completeness so you can actually see a wide coverage of what we're actually looking at or what we previously looked at. And it's really just to give that overall assurance to the committee that we have considered all of these particular areas. Perhaps if there's any questions.
Just a couple of things. Okay, as far as I can see. There's a question around under finance, procurement strategy and compliance. That's due back again in 25-26. Is that because you would do that every 2 years anyway, or has it been brought forward a bit because of the issues we talked about earlier?
No, it is something we do include every couple of years, and the main reason being is because procurement is so wide-reaching. It's under the 7 forces, and then you've got local procurement and local compliance with the procurement rules. It is a subject that regularly either receives limited assurance or reasonable assurance with a number of recommendations just due to the nature of the audit.
This before.
Yep.
And the other one was, I mean, again, not big anything earlier, but the workforce planning one is coming up. See, quite a lot to do. A lot of management's plate to do that, and it is scheduled for 24-25. So that's acknowledged. There's a number of issues I imagine which are relevant to this audit, but still works in progress.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
quick one from me. I'm just running through the IT related audits. So you've got an audit there around device management. Is there any coverage around licensing? Usually I'd see asset management variety, and that would cover your hardware and your software and licensing comes through that, which I know some providers are getting hotter on, so you need to manage the risk around that. So
Yeah.
factored in at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We looked at licenses a few years ago, and it was a very clean bill of health in terms of licenses, and in terms of overall risks, that was felt to be quite low compared to the others, especially around cybersecurity and device and credits and device management. But yeah, no, it's had previously good capacity.
And then for payroll audit, will this include overtime or any other payments that go to staff as part of the reconciliations?
Yeah, that will always include overtime payments.
Thank you. And generally through the actual plan for 24-25, do you have clarity on where you'd use data analytics?
Yes. So we've historically used data analytics around key financials and some of those systems. And what we do each year is try to look to see where else it's most relevant that we could use data analytics. One of the auditors who is vetted on contract, Phil Jolly, is our local data analyst. So where most of the team can do the basics of data analytics, we do have that technical data analytics person who's also a qualified accountant who does more complex data analytics reviews or if somebody's doing a review and they want to be using data analytics, he'll step into the review as well to do that.
Okay. Just when you're doing reports, can you make it clear which ones have used data analytics and which ones haven't? And I wonder if perhaps for the 25-26, the scope could include those with more clarity, which ones those will use data analytics. Not because most audits can use a little bit of basic data analytics. I mean, the more specialist data analytics.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's no problem. One of the things we have to be mindful of when we do using data analytics or trying to use it is whether the data that can be extracted from the system can support data analytics. ERP is notoriously one that it's difficult to do data analytics on because we can't get the right data out of the system to be able to do that for some areas. Where we can and where we can't, we'll highlight that in the report so that it's very clear as to why we have or haven't used it.
Yeah, thank you. From my experience, if you're going to use data analytics, you want a good long lead time exactly for that to ensure that actually it can be done. So having those discussions up front can be really helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Usually Phil will then be brought in for any specialist data analytics at the scoping stage so that he can then identify what the data needs are, speak to the individuals, clients directly to make sure that we've got all the right data sets and we can actually achieve the right data sets to take that through, I think.
Question for Fiona and for the management. Given that the first half of 24-25 has been substantially catching up on held over 22-23 and 23-24, given that the 24-25 plan is effectively planned for the next 6 months, how confident are we that this is deliverable as it's now presented?
Absolutely, it's I think well to raise those concerns. I've been given assurance in terms of the resources being assigned, the audit start dates are being set up, and the audits are going ahead with the level of what we've caught up on, where we've had a period over the last 6 months of quite a vast catch up, that we're on track to be able to deliver that. What I would like to be able to do, if that's okay, is have that meeting with management towards the end of October, to have that actually, where are we, this is the position and this is what it looks like, and make sure that we are on track to do that, and then bring a further update to the next audit committee, and then perhaps give you reassurance or assurance at each audit committee that is the case, because what I don't want to do is sit here and give absolute assurance and say, yeah, no problem, we can do that, and then come to the next audit committee and go, yeah, we can't. But what I would like to do is monitor it realistically, and based on the dates that we have and the resources we have in place, and with management having agreed to those audit start dates and where we are, that yes, we can. But I'm well aware things change, things develop. So if I could continue to give you that assurance, keep it as a watching brief, that's okay. If there's anything outside of the audit committee or before the audit committee, such as after the meeting in October, and if there is any need to raise it with you outside of the meeting, if I could then do that as well, so that I'm not waiting for the next meeting. If there's any particular changes to that.
I think from a personal perspective, I suspect I speak on behalf of everybody, it's better not to be surprised.
Yeah. As I say, we've got everything in place for it to work. But what I don't want to do is give absolute assurance, and then I would rather say, let's be cautious. We're working to it. Things are looking good, but to be cautious, then go the other way.
Thank you, Fiona. That's the Treasury outturn for elect. This will be the first time the committee has seen either of the Treasury reports. So if you could very gently take us through the purpose of the report and who you need to be looking for.
So this is the Treasury outturn report for the 23-24 financial year, and the PCC holds all the investments, all bank accounts in the PC's name, and per financial regulations, he's due to receive 3 formal Treasury reports each year. The first one is at the beginning of the year. He approves the Treasury Management and Investment Strategy, which then comes to kind of audit committee March meeting usually. We get a mid-year report which kind of monitors the progress. Sorry, within the Treasury Management Strategy, we set out our limits for how much we would invest with each counterparty, and our kind of prudential indicators in the report to know whether we're kind of overstretching ourselves on our capital programme. He receives a mid-year progress report, so that we compiled after the close out of P6. So I should suspect that mid-year progress report comes to the December audit committee meeting, and the final backward-looking outcome report, kind of monitoring how we did against our strategy that we set at the beginning of the year. So in terms of the report, this is actually the shortest one, so kind of the nicest one to introduce you to, I suppose, from that perspective. And it's the backward-looking one, looking at how we did versus our strategy that we set back in February 2023. I think this Treasury Management Investment Strategy for 23-24 was approved. And so it just kind of monitors our capital expenditure, which you can see our outturn was below what we initially said we would do in our strategy, just mainly down to the timing of capital spend. It looks at the capital financing requirement, which again was slightly less than expected, mainly due to changes in spend within the year and how we finance our capital within the year. It looks at the ratio of capital financing costs to net revenue budget, which was in line with our strategy. The authorised limits for external debt, we set these at the start of the year within the strategy, and you can see within the year 23-24, we did not exceed operational boundaries or our authorised limit. In fact, our debt didn't change within the year. We've got one long-term loan with PWLB, and we haven't taken out any more debt within the year. And it just gives you a summary of our investments at the end of the year as well. And as it notes, at no point in the year did we invest with borrowers outside of the strategy, and the kind of rating criteria we set within the strategy was not breached within the year, and nor were our limits that we would, which is £10 million per counterparty, that year as well. So it's kind of just provides assurance to the PCC that we are investing and borrowing in line strategy that we're at the start of the year. In terms of reference for the audit committee are to note the treasury management reports which come to the audit committee, but I'm happy to take any questions or if there's any comments or recommendations, then happy to discuss.
Possibly under the role of the committee, you say we're to note this.
Yeah.
Hopefully this would never happen. But if you did exceed the your limits during the year, would we be told?
Yes, the PCC, myself would be notified immediately and or would be notified before it would happen and would notify the PCC immediately as to why. And then I would bring that to them, explain why it had been immediately taken to benefit from having again and taking in advice regards to any kind of recommendations. But yeah, I would make sure we're okay.
I'm happy to note. Brings us to the any other business. I've not been notified any AOB to be brought to this meeting, one item on the meeting. So therefore, at almost 11 o'clock, we'll bring the meeting to a formal close. Our next meeting is scarily 6th of December, by which time 2024 is drawn to an end and we're thinking about Christmas month. So we shall see you then. Thank you very much.